So I suppose we can start out with basics. You know, any system is a set of parts that works in coordination to produce a specific outcome. And even though that is a very simple and easy to understand definition, it is actually difficult to apply it to the food system because we act as if it delivers one thing, food, which is in the name. But in fact, it actually delivers lots of things. So let me give you an example of that. The food system is through and through a product of history and a product of a phase of development that we now know as the Industrial Revolution. Because of the fact that the food system came into being at a time when in fact the amount of food was insufficient, then it makes sense that there was a great deal of focus on productivity. What we don't realize is that what the food system is actually delivering for the majority of us who do not produce food is that it is saving us time and it is actually selling us convenience. And in order to get us to buy what they provide, they have a language in any industry, which is that they want to generate as much profit as possible by adding as much value to the product that they sell. And so the food system version of that has another name from the standpoint of nutrition, and that is highly processed food. What the food system finds the most profitable to sell us is the ultra-processed food that is absolutely the worst for us to eat. The greater profit from the standpoint of the food industry is actually the worst stuff that we could ingest in terms of public health and personal well-being. That's why there's market breakdown. We're actually rewarding one thing that the food system does well, but we're not noticing that the other things that the food system delivers are either not evaluated at all or they're not priced correctly. That's the state of our food system. Another issue is that the way in which we produce is a significant contributor to climate change. If we were able to diminish that footprint, it would make a big difference in terms of neutralizing global warming. If we don't reverse those things, then essentially we won't have a livable planet. And that is something that we desperately need to address. Historically, what has happened is that we've ended up with a highly concentrated monopolistic system, which drives economic inequality. And so if you are poor, then you tend to suffer disproportionately from the ill effects of the food system, both environmentally as well as in terms of the effects of the food itself on your health. That means that there is a great deal of inequity that's built into the food system that also should not be for something that is as essential to every living being as the air that we breathe or the water that we drink. So that is a very concrete thing that needs to change, that the food system now needs to understand that a value that it could provide to the public, to the current model of profit-driven product delivering food system, what it should be selling us is health, because food is so directly connected to our well-being.
You know, and to build on that, because Ricardo makes an excellent point about these costs that aren't accounted for, their negative impacts, the environmental pollution that's caused by the use of synthetic fertilizers that someone else has to clean up. They're often described as externalities because they're external to the price of the product itself. And so the cost is borne by society, it's just not borne by the product price. And one way to start reorienting ourselves toward these costs is having a practice of true cost accounting in food. So there's some frameworks that are being developed that take into account the social, the environmental, and all the other aspects of food production. And we have other situations in which we have recognized as a public that water or energy or this good is something that belongs to everyone, that it needs to be managed for the benefit of all. So we've formed utilities. Energy was once a private innovation and was available basically on a market basis to anyone. And everyone realized that that's not going to end up with an equitable distribution of energy. So began to regulate it. So food is regulated to a certain degree, but recognizing food as a system hasn't yet crossed that threshold into a full recognition that that itself is something that should be better managed for the benefit of the public. So I mentioned energy earlier. We had a global monolithic energy system in the 20th century that was based entirely on fossil fuels. We tried as a nation to shift our dependence on fossil fuels in the late 70s and made some inroads to that, but not immediate success. In the 21st century, the approach to making those bigger changes in the energy system became local. So local governments set their targets for renewable energy, knowing there will be more wind in one place than the other, there will be more solar in another place. And so every region knows what their best portfolio array would be. They set goals for that. And then they made progress. I think we all know now what that progress meant collectively, but it took place on what I'm going to call the village scale. Technically, it was the municipal or state level, but it was subnational. So I think we have that opportunity with many systems of recognizing what we've learned and doing an all of the above. It's not an either or proposition. We now have the ability, the talent, the wherewithal to do all of the above and to know when it makes sense. I'm not suggesting we turn back the dial. I'm suggesting that we have wisdom that we gain from the past and structures and systems that we can reflect on and take the best of them, which means that it's also an investment in communities. And it's participatory and responsive to community needs of hunger, needs of culturally appropriate food, need to grow your own food, all the array of things that make for a richly textured and agroecologically sound and holistic food system we can do. We've done it with energy, and we can do it again with our food system.
So as we record this, we are in the last part of the year 2020, which is going to be memorable for a number of different reasons. But one of them was the planet as a whole experienced the negative consequences of a food system that is over-leveraged in a very specialized model. And so what this industrial food system has done at the global level, without failing to acknowledge all of the benefits, so I can sit here sipping coffee if I like, when this is not a place where you can grow coffee in the state of Maryland. But what this system has done is essentially set up a cult of efficiency that has set us up for major failure and for vulnerability for challenges, not only the pandemic, but for challenges that are certainly in our future. So I'll just mention climate change. We have two functional channels in the industrial food system. One of those is the channel that most of us experience when we go to a restaurant or a cafeteria, and the other is the channel we experience when we go to a grocery store. And these two channels account for the bulk of everything that this food system distributes to eaters. But each of them require different specialization, different amounts, different packaging, different labeling, and so on. So they're not interchangeable. So we've created these single channels through which the majority of the volume of the food system flows. So what you actually need, highly redundant systems, such that if any part of it were blown up, there would be other parts of it that would take over and that would allow communication to flow. So that's not a new insight. Some people may recall that in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, the largest grocer at that time, and still the largest grocer in the United States, Walmart, installed these 30 or 40 regional warehousing systems that are going to be sourced from local production and be interconnected so that they can supplement each other. So we should actually act into that. We need federal policies, some of which are actually on the book but are not enforced, to make it so the $1.8 trillion of economic power of the food system, its monopolistic structure, can be broken down so that the federal government can act in the public interest. And according to what the Constitution actually says the government should be promoting, which is the general welfare. This is not to say that the interest of food businesses should not matter. Is to say that right now they are the people that make the call for all the rest of us. So their economic and political power needs to be controlled. It needs to be broken down so that what is actually for the general welfare can get through, creating the conditions where the creativity, the entrepreneurship would allow different models to come into being. By the end of this year, we will have subsidized the industrial food system north of $51 billion in order to prop it up and keep it functioning. $51 billion for a system that is not delivering public good, public health, equity, general welfare. We have the ultimate leverage because that is our money. So we should demand that either the performance of that system changes or that we use that money in a completely different way to reward a totally different system. One that is locally, regionally focused, that is redundant. Nobody can have lived through the year 2020 and conclude that the system doesn't require major rethinking.
So let me build on this idea of what our investment in food as a public good means. What we need to shift to is recognizing that the distribution of food is something that has been managed privately, but needs to have stronger public investment in order for it to be equitable. And that may sound scary for some folks. It may seem like it's going to completely replace our current system. There's room in this for private enterprise. And I do want to say that there's a lot of small businesses that thrive on the private enterprise around food and creating value-added food products in restaurants and all the artistic expression that food has. And there's room for all of that. And some of the pivotal moves that I think are important for local governments include recognition of the ability to create a good food system, but looks at nutrition and the whole community. And we see this in Common Market that was started in Philadelphia. That's what some call a food hub, but I call it a mission-driven intermediary. It's a nonprofit organization, and they're dedicated to the public interest in serving smaller farmers and farmers of color in particular, and making sure they have market for their products so they can maintain economic viability. And they're also dedicated to serving community. So when COVID hit, they were able to understand who needed support and where emergency food was needed. They were doing really well at it. But what if there was government investment in that? What if there was a local bond measure that invested in a food hub that is a mission-driven intermediary and has an oversight body that you understand how that funding is going and that distributes to small markets in low-income communities so that they can have healthy food as well. So there's ways to find the public interest in food and really commit to it so that it is that more equitable and holistic system. One aspect of that is our school food system, which serves so many in the community, which is supported by public funding. So if we were to create more opportunity, create incentives that support school districts that are reinvesting in the local food economy, reinvesting in sustainable production of food, and reinvesting in fair labor productions, and that comes back to the community in many ways. The economic multiplier is what it's called in wonky terms, but it means that for every dollar you invest in a system like that, you'll nearly double the return on that dollar in terms of the benefit to the local community. Everyone benefits. I think that local government can take the responsibility of recognizing their role of leadership in the food system and set concrete goals for how the food system can function in their region. And it could start by having a program and having aggregate targets for purchasing with all the major institutions to stimulate market demand. But it also would need to be supplemented by the full commitment and engagement of the economic development and workforce investment boards of local government to provide the needed stimulus funds and the needed support, technical assistance, as well as financial assistance to get some of these newer ideas off the ground, including mission-driven intermediaries. And having the coordinated participation of the economic development and workforce investment boards in order to have this infrastructure come into place. There also needs to be an investment in some facilities. It's infrastructure, which is what we need to build back: cold storage, distribution facilities, and local processing. This is actually a way to build forward out of our current recession to create economic opportunity on the local level, and this can be done through the food system. You not only create jobs and economic opportunity, but you create resilience in the food system in times of emergency, as well as in all times.
This may sound trite, but the youth of this nation are giving me hope. And let me explain. We are living at a time where the received narrative in the food system goes something along the lines of these religiously persecuted people came from Europe and they found this wild, unpeopled continent. And they gradually tamed it and civilized it and made it productive, and it's a place where there's equal opportunity for everyone. Young people today are not buying that narrative. There is a reckoning in society that this nation is a racist nation, and this is related to the food system because the actual narrative is that you have these colonizers who found a populated, peopled continent with 25 million people on it, committed genocide and displaced those people, and made their survivors some of the most immiserated people on the planet. And in addition, we contracted for people to abduct folks who we then enslaved and on whose labor we built the industrial economy of the United States. And we replaced it with a system where essentially the properties of that system of slavery survive because of the fact that we don't remunerate the people that continue to perform those menial jobs in a way that's commensurate with the value that they contribute to the food system. So we have a system whereby we set up the reference population as the virtuous, creative, modern population for whom everyone else is just here to serve them. All of the populations that I mentioned are hardworking, entrepreneurial, and creative, but only one has been rewarded. Only one has been privileged by the political and economic system that we've created. But yet the core American value is to make things better. The runway to make things better in the food system is immense. It is enormous. So if we can demonstrate that that can be done in a way that's better for everyone, and that no one feels like in order to eat nourishing food, they have to exploit the planet or people, why wouldn't we do that? And that's what young people are saying these days. And that's what makes me hopeful.
It's a difficult moment that we're in right now in the country, and a lot of confusion exists on the way forward. We've been through difficult times before. We have the ability to learn from all the ages we've ever been. Part of it is understanding all the different parts of what makes the problem so that you can find the way toward the solution. And I don't have an easy answer for that. But I think what at the heart we're talking about here is respect. We're talking about respect for people. We're talking about respect for planet. We have had respect for the bottom line of profit, but let's add in these other values of respect for people and planet. And in that, I'll just mention something else from my home state of Hawaii, which is the law of aloha. It describes aloha as kindness, unity to be expressed with harmony, humility, and patience. It's more than a word of greeting or farewell. It means mutual regard and affection and extends warmth and caring with no obligation in return. It is the essence of relationships in which each person is important to every other person for collective existence. So I tear up because it's a powerful idea, and I feel the ocean of collective humanity welling up in me when I say that. This law that I just quoted is embedded in the statute of Hawaii, and it requires that all elected and appointed officials act with aloha. So I would just recommend that as a way forward.